Welcome to Mental Healthy, the podcast where we share stories of the professionals and experts worldwide working in the mental health field. Here's your host, Dr. Kenyon Knapp.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Glad to have you with us here today on Mental Healthy. And I've got a great guest today, Dr. Lisa Sosin. Dr. Sosin has been the director of our Ph.D. program in counselor education and supervision here at Liberty University for the last 14 years. But there's a lot more to you, though. So, Dr. Sosin, welcome to the podcast, first off.
Thank you so much, Kenyon. Dr. Knapp, I'm delighted to be here, truly.
You can call me Kenyon if you want.
And you can call me Lisa.
Okay. Well, great. Well, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, just so they get a little more of a feel for where you're coming from today.
Thank you so much. Well, Kenyon, I've been in practice supporting people reaching their goals in counseling and training others to do so for the last 40 years, believe it or not, which makes me feel very old. I am passionate right now about using the whole body, helping people connect and embody, which is what we're talking about today, using creative and expressive arts. Because a lot of the people that I work with and that we work with as counselors can't just talk through what's going on for them. They're experiencing things in their body that they need to listen to and learn how to interpret. So I just love what I do. I could go on and on. Lately, I've been running creative and expressive arts personal growth groups for trauma. And also I started doing soul care retreats, which I really love too. So I won't babble on and on. We'll just move right in. But I guess the thing I want to say is this is such an awesome field to be in. So important, so precious.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. That gives the listeners a little bit of a feel for all your different interests and all the background you have and experience. That's great. And I know we're talking today, too, about treating anxiety, depression, and trauma through this whole embodiment practice. And first off, I've heard you talk about embodiment before, but it's a little bit of an unusual topic. So let's just start out with that. What is embodiment?
It's such an important concept and so misunderstood. It almost has a sort of like new agey sound to it, but we need to reclaim it back as something that is simple and based on the functioning of our nervous system. So embodiment is living through all of the body's senses. A lot of us know from a lot of research that the body stores trauma and informs us of our experience. And so we have to learn to live not just from the head and our thoughts, but to be connected to the whole self, which is what embodiment is. It's sensing, knowing, respecting, and honoring the whole self created by God. And this really touches into what God has said, to love him with the whole self. We have to be connected to our whole self to give that self to God. Harvard psychiatrist Dan Siegel calls embodiment the brain embodied throughout the whole physical being. And his findings, as well as others, clarify that the mind exists throughout the body and not just in the head. It's connected to all our organs, and these organs are speaking in a sense. So embodiment is critical to healthy functioning because information from the body plays a vital role in information processing. So we're always processing the external and the internal world. And so we have to be embodied, that is connected to our embodied soul, to know ourselves, to know others, and to even know God. So the opposite of embodiment is disassociation or disconnection from the embodied soul. And, we see this in people with trauma where the vagal nerve is activated and there's, in a sense, they're cut off from their body's knowing as a form of protection. So that's a little bit about embodiment, Kenyon.
The part I can relate to from past experience, this sounds a lot like The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Is that embodiment as well, or is that a different perspective on this?
Absolutely. His
Okay.
work is really important for trauma specialists to understand. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good. I'm sort of assimilating all that you're saying here. It's a little different than what I'm used to, but that's great. Well, let me ask you, I can tell this is like a holistic approach to therapy and understanding your own body. It addresses mental, social, cultural, spiritual health. How does embodiment relate to all those different areas? Like I've heard you say it, but how does it relate to all those different topics?
Sure. It's really important to ethical and effective counseling and psychotherapy and recovery work. There's a tremendous body of research backing the importance of embodiment in clinical work. A lot of the folks we see are depressed and anxious and traumatized. And if we think about these states as nervous system states, where there's hypoarousal, which we see in depression, and that's the shutting down of the nervous system. The checking out, we see the kind of symptoms in depression where a person feels unworthy, the person feels hopeless and helpless. Well, this is actually a nervous system state, which you can measure, which is really phenomenal. It's almost like that play dead aspect of the nervous system. And then there's in anxiety, we see hyperarousal of the nervous system, where cortisol is pouring out, where the body is saying danger, 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 which kind of disconnects people from their cortical region. If you think about it neurobiologically, their amygdala is activated and they lose sight with their values, with their identity, as they try to run from the bear, in a sense. That's what it's feeling like in the body. So people who come into counseling, they don't understand that their symptoms represent these nervous system activations. And it is so enlightening. Even the youngest children I work with, Kenyon, understand this. And so clients and clinicians who work from this kind of embodiment or neurobiological premise find it easier to externalize what's going on and then monitor and modify it effectively. Very powerful. So embodiment in terms of research, and I can name all these people, but I won't, because that would take the rest of our time together to name these researchers who have found that embodiment work helps people tolerate and decrease distress. It increases normal and restores normal relational functioning. So you think about your work with families, with children, with couples. When I work with couples and they're both understanding, I am getting activated by something in the relationship, and they learn even just to take a break and tend to their own being and then come back, they're back in their cortical region. They can ask for what they need. They can have boundaries. They can understand one another. But when you're activated, you can't. You're acting out something that's activated inside of you. So it provides also a means of, if you're working with somebody in practice, embodiment work enables you to use imaginal exposure, in a sense, to revisit trauma and then even act it out, put it to words. It is very powerful because if people understand that they're activated beyond what their cortical region can know and express, then of course we have to use other means to help them tolerate it and express it than just talking, because it doesn't make sense to them.
Sure.
So
everything you're saying is making sense, but it sounds like there's an unconscious aspect of this as well, because you said when people are activated, they're not necessarily processing it cognitively. It's more of a fight or flight way of thinking at that point. So how do you monitor embodiment in yourself? Like, how do you track it or become more consciously aware of your level of embodiment?
Right. You could see that would be really important. And there's lots of stuff going on in the field mindfulness practices, and every theoretical approach has ways to help people monitor and modify what Dan Siegel calls the flow of energy and attention of the mind, the embodied mind. In the research team that I have in the groups that I've been running, which we've been doing since 2017, we've published in a couple of different journals. What we've found is there is a creative and expressive arts way of doing this called embodiment monitoring. And I just published on this, and I'm going to show you and others. I don't know if you can see this. This is an embodiment monitor. This is how simple it is. It looks like a 6-inch ruler, Kenyon. And what we're helping people do in the middle, you can see I have a little sunshine, and that's actually me and Jesus, because I find this the most peaceful thing. Other people, you don't have to be working with believers to use the embodiment monitor. But what you're doing early on is teaching grounding work. You're teaching things that help your clients realize, what does it feel like in this 3-4 zone, which we would call the all fine state? What does your body feel like when it is in a state of homeostasis? You're not anxious. You're not depressed. You may not be elated, but you don't feel like there's a threat going on, or you're not normal. So that's the all fine state. Now, when we move toward hyperarousal, which I have written as a 6 over here on the monitor, hyperarousal is when you're starting to get anxious and moving from the frontal lobe through the limbic system and the amygdala. And at a 5, if a person can recognize what are the thoughts, feelings, and body sensations they start to experience at a 5, they can pull themselves back into here using various tools that we teach in counseling. But if they get out to a 6, usually that is such a hyper-aroused state that it's very hard to get back in, right? And so we're teaching people, and they can color, they can use words here. What are the kind of thoughts you have? What are the kinds of feelings? What kind of interactions and experiences inside your body and externally that activate this? Common thoughts moving toward hyperarousal are, what if so-and-so thinks this or that? What if I don't, what if? And if we use that downward arrow technique, so common to cognitive behavior work, people can learn to understand, well, no wonder why I feel so anxious. Because if you can name, okay, what if so-and-so thinks I'm a bad person? Then you can say, okay, what if someone thinks that? And you can get down to the very core feeling, which usually is something like, then I'll be alone forever, then my children will die, then, And then on the other side is hypoarousal, which is more like your depression and shame state. Same is the case here, Kenyon. If you're at a 2, it's more likely that you can pull back into a 3. Like, a lot of the thoughts here are shame. I don't belong. People think I'm ugly. People think I'm stupid. Things like that, which are depressive unworthiness thoughts. And then it's the same thing. By the time it gets to a 1, usually the vagal nerve is activated. The person is too cut off. Now, when you think about things like addictions, this is very humanizing, because you can't bear being in this state or this state. So people find ways to kind of get a faux or a fake sense of getting into here, but they're not actually here. They're getting enslaved to something that requires more and more of their soul to get the same fake feeling of safety. So this is what the embodiment monitor is. And in my work with clients and even students, I am helping clinicians understand when they're moving away from their state of embodiment so they don't move away from their clients, if that makes sense. And then helping clients get a whole plethora of tools, biological, psychological, social, to help them get back into their all fine state without using things like cutting, drugs, pornography, and every other thing. And by the way, people in the church and outside of the church are using all these things at the same measure, because you cannot live in a chronically hyper or hypo-aroused state.
That makes sense. Now, on that chart you were showing me a second ago, on one end there was the hypo and then there's the hyper arousal. So you've got like the panic and high anxiety, then you've got the depression on the other end. Let's try to make this a little more nitty gritty practical for people. What are some interventions you can do if a person is on one extreme or the other, either highly anxious or highly depressed? What do you do to get them to that middle?
Thank you for asking that, because it really is so basic. So let's start with anxiety or hyperarousal of the nervous system. And remember, this is normal. People go into counseling and they get labels, and we appreciate the labels. But really, every label kind of detracts from the person that they're human. Everybody is human. And these kind of things happen for everyone. So anxiety may entail, like I said, feelings of fear, racing thoughts focused on threat, increased heart rate, sweating, losing sense of space and time, inability to think clearly. And this is important because when we can't think clearly, we can't act according to our authentic self and values. Right? So this is very important. So because of external or internal stimuli, the fight or flight mechanism is activated. So I just wanted to review that. So one way to dissipate anxiety that, in fact, we've been presenting on in my research team all over the place, and people love it, is to move freely to music. Finding music that expresses the angst that is felt and moving the body, because it is an energy. It's not like a new agey energy. It's just literally a nervous system activation of neurochemicals that are firing. It's not, anything magical here that we're talking about. And so if people are moving, and you do this in therapy where, for instance, with a woman who can't say no, but she's very angry inside, but is afraid to say no or have boundaries, you might have that person express that with the body and just practice saying no. No, this is critical. It's critical for Christian people who think saying no is not nice. Well, what about if somebody is touching you in a way that is violating? This is very important stuff. And then, after doing that, one of the key things to making it effective is processing it. If I'm seeing you in counseling, Kenyon, and we're doing some kind of creative way of expressing, we're going to sit down after and you're going to say, what did you notice doing that? What did that mean to you? And so then it becomes cortical, right? It moves into the cortical, and the narrating it sort of tames it. Name it to tame it, we've heard before. It's very true. So that's an anxiety kind of one.
What about on the other extreme then? Let's go there. Like, what if it's depression and the person can't think clearly because they're so hypo-aroused?
Good, that's right. So these two constructs of fear and shame, by the way, are at the root of probably almost everything we see in counseling that is not purely functionally based. In other words, if there's disabilities there, it still relates, but then there's special needs we have to tend to as well. So depression is also a nervous system activation. Actually, it's almost like a deactivation. And so the body is saying, there's nothing I can do in this situation. I am just going to play dead. And when people hear this, they're like, that is what I've been doing. I've been helpless and hopeless. And then we can validate that in a number of ways. So remembering that this is a normal human experience, When you think about shame, isn't that what Adam and Eve hid? This is so shared humanity. And so it may entail thoughts of worthlessness and hopelessness. The body may shut down and oversleep or undereat or overeat as a coping, be listless. It's moving into a state of disassociation, right, from the soul. And this is all a natural response to regulate the nervous system's ability to manage input, right? And so that's very validating. Now, one way to help people monitor and modify hypoarousal is to get them engaged. So in, I think, 2016, I published this creative exposure intervention, which is really, it's such an honor to do this with people. Now, I tend in my practice, Kenyon, to have people get a big journal, like a big art journal, and in between use arts to try to capture their thoughts and feelings and bodily experience. And this is to help them get reestablished with their identity. Now, the creative exposure intervention, it just simply has them with art, depict them in the center, that all fine state that we've been talking about, a safe place and a way to downregulate and be peaceful. Then from that picture of themselves in the center in a circle, they're going to put spokes out to represent the thoughts and feelings and themes of their lives. So if a person is depressed, they might put a spoke out to, when I go to church, I don't belong. I don't feel like I'm normal. I don't feel like I'm engaged with others. So they feel alone. Well, of course, then they're going to start feeling. And then you can bring that back and explore it, bring it back in that, yeah, that's the way you experience it. Right. And that feels very lonely. And that makes sense. And do you know, there's a lot of people actually who feel that way. And then you can look more deeply at what's going on and what they need, because people experience their spiritual identity differently. They may be Christian, they may be from any faith, but sometimes a certain spiritual setting, for instance, doesn't align with a person's nervous system or way of processing, and it elicits anxiety, and feelings of not belonging. That's I hope that makes sense. So you can put spokes out with this intervention to all the themes in their lives that are contributing to them feeling unworthy, and then support them in regaining the awareness that they're made in God's image. And let's explore who you are and help you to live inside of you without shame. Yeah, it's really powerful.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. Well, I'll tell you, there's probably some listeners right now going, this sounds really cool, or I really click with this, or whatever. Are there some resources you would recommend? Like, I don't know if there's a book you've written about this or an article you could refer people to for more detail on this? Yeah,
definitely. There's a couple of articles. I would say that if people listening are interested, they should reach out to me, because I have articles, I have things published, I have presentations. I also run soul care groups that incorporate this, and creative and expressive arts personal growth groups. So I would almost want to connect with people and see what their needs are. And, are you a clinician and you want to consult a little bit about how to do these practices? Are you a Liberty student? And, that kind of thing, what the need is.
Sure. Well, if people did want to follow up with you or consult with you, how would you prefer them to contact you?
Yeah, just email me. I'll give you my email now. Should I just say it, Kenyon?
Sure, please.
Yeah. It's LSSOSIN at liberty.edu. So there's two S's in the middle, LSSOSIN. at liberty.edu.
Okay, well, great. Well, we talked about how you treat anxiety and depression, those two extremes. But at the beginning, I asked you about Bessel van der Kolk and the whole trauma approach to all this. So let's just say your client came in with a lot of trauma and they were, on one extreme or the other because of their trauma. I guess trauma could go either way, right?
It's usually both. I call it fear, shame.
Okay. Well, what are some interventions you would use with a person with a traumatic background to help them embody?
Right. Well, this is such an important question because the body is storing the anxiety. It's not in the head that we can talk a person into not having trauma stored in their body. They have to learn how to tolerate what their body is feeling, put it into words. There's a real sense of shame for people often who've experienced trauma. What I've seen is that there's both hypo and hyper arousal of the nervous system at the same time. And so, first of all, any of what we've just discussed can be very helpful. And there's tons of research and empirically based treatments for trauma. I would say that people need specialized training to understand how to really help people with trauma. But one thing that I have found extremely helpful, and again, we've published this treatment intervention in Specialists for Group Work and also the Journal of Psychology and Christianity, where we're getting diverse people who have been traumatized, marginalized, bullied. People don't understand that bullying traumatizes people. It disconnects them from their soul. They feel like being me is not safe in the world, so I have to hide and camouflage and pretend in the world. This just has a terrible impact on the soul. And so what we wanted to do was bring people together to heal so they could, first of all, get a sense of shared humanity. Like, yeah, you're normal. You belong, and you belong right here with us. In the group, we have 6 sessions. We're learning a lot of these things, but we're also processing together and connecting with one another what you're experiencing. So one helpful intervention that we use in the group is called a body scan. And it's very simple. It's just quieting yourself, looking inward, and noticing what you're feeling. Are your shoulders tense? Is your jaw tight? A lot of times we're just holding so much tension in our body. And the person is just, it doesn't take a long time just to scan through. And then with any part that they notice is feeling discomfort, we're just focusing on that and noticing. Yesterday, I was working with somebody and, they got in touch with the fact that a part of their body felt very uncomfortable. And when we just started focusing on that, just this memory, this traumatic memory sort of came up for no reason. You know what I'm saying? It somehow had gotten activated when she quieted her body and listened. And she was able to process this and have all kinds of insights on it. And then we could begin to think, how can you care for your soul instead of replicating what was done to you, which was cutting you out? And so it was very beautiful and powerful. So I have to say, though, and if people are interested in experiencing this group, please contact me, especially if you're a counselor, because I would really like you to get the experience of what is a wonderfully healthy kind of group. But the most powerful and healing aspect of this is the community, like I said, that form as folks support one another, listen to one another, attune to one another, which when you think about trauma, the definition of trauma really is experiencing something extremely terrifying and being alone in it. So when everybody is sharing their narratives in the way that's comfortable to them and other people are there for them, it's very healing. It's like untraumatizing. It's very beautiful. So that's one way you can think about trauma, but I really want to emphasize the power of group work and shared humanity.
So there's a real experiential component to this within the group.
That's right, experiential and relational. And my favorite thing is bringing diverse people from all over the world together. I run these groups virtually. I never thought I would, but when COVID happened, I learned, hey, this is effective virtually. And so both the soul care groups, which incorporate a lot of this, and also the creative and expressive arts personal growth groups are run virtually so that I can have people from all over the world, somebody in India, if they want to, be up at 1:00 in the morning, which some do, can attend. And this way people can get connected with people from other cultures. And that multiculturalism experience is vital in our day and age when there's so much unrest.
Definitely. Well, let me ask you about something else. When I was reading about your work, you talk about the importance of identity solidification and identity re-solidification. What does that mean? And can you explain that to us?
Yeah. Solidifying the identity and re-solidifying after trauma, because what trauma does, just growing up in this fallen world is traumatizing, especially for people who are different in any way and process the world in a different way, is critical to shifting from being a human doing, which is a lot of what people are, being in the world, instead of a human being who is grounded in their own God-given personhood. Now, each person that you see everywhere, no matter what their faith is, no matter what their color, gender, everything, they are a person knit together by God. And each person has been blessed with a unique and authentic personhood that somehow reflects the image of God. No matter what they're functioning, their ability, their intelligence level, their ethnicity, their gender. This is critical to Paul's theology and understanding of the body of Christ and people outside of the body of Christ. So many people we see in counseling have become separate from that person they are, or never even had the opportunity to discover and become that person. And that's tragic, because how could you, whether you're a believer and functioning in the body of Christ, separated from your soul, or not a person in the body of Christ, but in the world and still in the image of God, how could you function in the part you have in the whole? So when you haven't had the opportunity to solidify your sense of self, or you have this sense of shame and fear about being yourself in the world, the job of counseling primarily is to help that person discover their authentic God-made self and have the courage to be that self in the world. In other words, what are their values? What are the things they enjoy? And sometimes I was working with somebody yesterday who didn't even remember who they were, because from the earliest age, but that self is there and they can get nuances of it. Oh, I loved being outside. Yeah. Oh, and the person said, I still love being outside, but I never go outside for some reason. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So how do we help people blossom in their identity, to separate who they are from the world and the flesh that's fallen and from Satan's accusations, and then have the courage to live out of their value system and their being? And so this is a great privilege of the kind of work that we do in counseling. And this is why when I work with Christian emerging counselors and counselor educators, some people are afraid about the whole idea of working with non-believers. It's very important to, if you can, work with non-believers, because first of all, they are image bearers of God. And it's not a time for evangelism. It's a time for healing. And then, when they're reconnected to their soul, we can be praying that they come to know the glorious King who made them. But first, let's help them heal in ethical and effective ways.
And it's making sense to me as you talk about how our connection with God helps us to get away from the fear and the shame. And then we get to that cortical way of thinking where we can really process. It's all coming together as you talk. So it just takes me a minute.
I'm so glad.
Well, I'm looking over all my notes here about all that you've written. And I'm sure that I've missed something. And I always try to end these podcasts with sort of a catch-all question, like, what else would you like the listeners to know that I haven't asked about yet? So let me just go there with you now. And is there anything else that we haven't covered yet that you want them to hear before we wrap it up?
I want to just lastly say, because I know a lot of people who are listening are counselors themselves, and social workers and psychology folks. I want to talk to you personally about the preciousness of your soul and the importance of you learning who you are, your authentic identity, the beauty of who you are and uniqueness, and developing that ability to really come alongside people and listen. Listen to people, not be afraid, not try to fix, just make a beautiful space for that person to blossom. And your own nervous system state when you're doing that is important, because the brain and the soul is relational, just like God is relational. And in the context of your relationship and your being present in an uncritical way, that doesn't mean we allow for everything. The purpose of the therapeutic relationship is to provide a safe place for people to come up the emotion development ladder. And sometimes it's sloppy. And sometimes even Christian people say things you don't expect. And that's because anger is messy. And they haven't had a relationship to learn to speak the truth in love around their anger. And so you get to do that with people. So I want to say, engage in your own soul care. And if you're helping people with soul care, learn how to do it really well. And don't be afraid about the creative and expressive arts ways, from nature to animals, to dancing, to music, to visual arts, to beaches. Whatever brings peace to the soul helps integrate the nervous system and the mind, especially you and your presence. That's it, Kenyon. That's all I got.
Well, that's great. It all makes sense. I totally get it. I mean, you're bringing it back to the therapeutic relationship and how that conveys so much peace and acceptance. And I experience it with you. I've known you for a number of years, that your peacefulness sort of helps other people calm and hopefully helps them think more cortically instead of the fear and shame. So that's really neat. I'll tell you that one last time, why don't you remind the listeners of your email address just so they can contact you if they want to follow up and learn more about this?
I hope you do connect with me, because maybe you'll want to attend a group. It's LSSOSIN at liberty.edu. So that's LS Sosin at liberty.edu. I would really be honored to connect with you and support you any way I can. And I don't want you to go I guess if you're at Liberty, you can find the articles for free. But if you just Google them, you would have to buy them, which is not what I want you to do. Just reach out to me and I'll send you a copy.
Well, free is always good. Everyone loves that, right?
Yes, yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Dr. Sosin, or Lisa. I really appreciate it. And I know the listeners will too. And with that, we'll wrap it up. So join us next time, listeners, and I hope you've enjoyed it today. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mental Healthy. If you want to hear more episodes, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts and head to linktree.com/mentalhealthypodcast for all of our social media platforms with the latest mental healthy content. If you have a story to share that relates to what we discussed in in or any other episode, please contact us at mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. That's mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.